Hello everyone, I'm meteorologist Chesley McNeil, and we are continuing to update you on Ian's path as the storm has been, well, moving more toward the east as we go along, and now we're looking at a major, a monster Category 4 hurricane, really on the cusp of becoming a Category 5. Certainly possible before it makes landfall, but we'll continue to watch that. Right now, those winds are at Category 4 criteria, and if you take a look at this eye, very well defined, sliding a little bit closer now to the coastline there. You see Fort Myers, and then as you make your way further up to the north, you can see Tampa there. So expecting the hurricane to make landfall today. And it could be just to the north of Fort Myers, could be Fort Myers impacted by this. Obviously already starting to feel the brunt of that storm surge coming in, and also the outer bands producing tornadoes in the area as well. Again, this is a monster storm, folks. Very, very wide, very, very powerful. Again, Category 4, packing winds up to 155 miles per hour. 158 mile an hour winds would produce a Category 5 hurricane. And so we're talking about major destruction, major flooding taking place down here in this area in South Florida. The latest track from the Hurricane Center has the storm moving inland. That'll be later on today, making its way inland and beginning to dissipate down to a Category 1 by the time we get to Thursday morning, mid-morning, as it moves to the center of the peninsula. And then notice the latest track takes it out to sea. So back over toward the Atlantic. It'll head up toward Daytona Beach, for example, as a tropical storm, then out to sea. Now, could it strengthen from there? Certainly it could. The Hurricane Center has it remaining as a tropical storm as it moves back onshore, close to, let's say, Tybee Island, or over toward Hilton Head, we'll say between the border of Georgia and South Carolina, and then making its way further off to the north into South Carolina as a tropical depression, and furthermore up to the north as an area of low pressure. Now, as the storm gets closer to us, that's when we're expecting to see the impacts here. Notice a couple things from this particular map here. The cone of uncertainty, those white lines, the outer lines, show you that the storm could move to the west or more to the east. It has had a trend of moving more toward the east, and so we got to believe that that's pretty much the path it's going to take at this particular point. As it starts to move up towards Jacksonville, that's when we'll feel the brunt as far as our coastline goes. You're definitely talking about flooding. A lot of storm surge there as well. That's where we'll have the greatest onshore flow. Then once it gets to the north of that area, it will start to move over towards South Carolina, and then we'll start to see some of those impacts right here in North Georgia. Now, what can we see here in North Georgia? Well, mainly rain and wind. Now, because it's more to the east of us, we're not going to see the heavy rain and the heavy wind. In fact, some of the models are starting to back off on the amount of rain and wind that we will receive here. And when we're talking about the wind, we're talking more about gusts. Those gusts could be maybe up to 30, 35 miles per hour, but not the sustained winds. If that area of low pressure was a little bit further to the west, then we could be talking sustained winds of 20 to 30 miles per hour, but that's not going to be the case. I'm thinking more in the form of gusts with this particular system. Now, look at the spaghetti models coming together. There's one just little outlier there, but they're really coming together, taking the storm between Tampa and Fort Myers, making a landfall there, and then making its way up toward Daytona Beach and then back out to sea. Yesterday, when we were looking at these models, those pink models there were the only ones that had the storm making its way out to sea. Everyone else, everywhere, most of those other models, in fact, the ones that we really take a good look at, had the storm moving mainly north. So now coming to more of agreement that this would move over the peninsula and then out to sea and then back inland. And even notice it's most westward models, not even into the Atlanta metro area, staying to the east of us, which means better conditions for us as far as where the storm goes. Now, that does not mean we won't see rain or wind. It just won't be as intense. That's the good news for us. If you take a look at these latest model runs, and this is the US model or the Gfs model, and it shows that heavy rain staying right along the coastline and then into South and North Carolina. Meanwhile, for us, we're talking anywhere from a half an inch, maybe up to 2 inches in some spots. As far as rainfall, let's look at the Euro model. It's just about the same. As you can see, that heavy rain stays mainly over toward the east. Now, you can see into southeast Georgia, we will be seeing some very heavy rain there. And that makes sense, because as the storm starts to move a little bit to the north, adjacent to Jacksonville, for example, we'd be getting the brunt of that onshore flow. I do think there will be some significant flooding down toward the southeast of our state. With that onshore flow, that storm surge, that very heavy rain that's going to be down there as well, and then that will continue to track further off to the north. So you're talking very heavy rain for parts of South Carolina and then into North Carolina. Meanwhile, here in North Georgia, including the Atlanta metro area, we're still talking about a half inch, maybe an inch and a half to about 2 inches of rainfall possible as that storm continues to push further off to the north. So again, for us, the impacts would be the rain and the wind. Now, the timing for this, for us right now, stays the same. About late Friday into early Saturday. Some wind would be associated with it and some rain as well. Then the further west you go, I think that'll be the lower totals as far as the rain goes, as long as the storm stays on the current track. Let me show you our in-house model, and this would be the best case scenario for us. This now places that area of low pressure, or at least the center of circulation, further out to sea, meaning that it would begin to move to the north, and instead of making another landfall closer to our shoreline or closer to the border between Georgia and South Carolina, it would make it further north into South Carolina. So let's go through this. Today we'd have mostly sunny skies, looking good. High thin clouds will be on the move. So by the time we get to the afternoon, you're looking at a little bit more in the way of cloudiness. They're thin clouds, so we'll get decent amounts of sunshine. We'll do the same as we head into Thursday, anywhere from partly to mostly sunny skies. Now look at this. By the time we get to Friday morning, that center of circulation is well out to sea, adjacent to our state, and you can see the bulk of the rainfall now over into South Carolina. Again, this is the best case scenario. This is our in-house model showing this, and this could happen, right? If it continues to push a little bit further to the east, which I think is possible, that heavy rain stays mainly over into South Carolina and North Carolina. And then look at that. As it begins to move back into South Carolina, of course, it will be weakening once it makes landfall. And then you're looking at just some light rain pushing into our far northern counties. This will be by Friday night going into Saturday. That wraparound would bring us a little light rain as well as we head into Saturday, and I think it lingers pretty much into Sunday as well. And so we're going to go back to the radar and show you really this storm, again, a massive storm, continue to slide further off to the north. We've been looking at that eye, very, very powerful. That's where those powerful winds are, 155 miles per hour, folks. This is nothing to be played with, obviously. A lot of folks have evacuated this area. You can see also by the outer bands the tornado warnings that have been associated with it. There's one currently there just to the north. In fact, we can just go on down in here and see this tornado warning associated with some of the outer bands. You see some areas not even receiving any rain at all, but where you have the land falling hurricane, typically you'll receive these brief spin-up tornadoes that happen to pop up because of the friction that takes place as it begins to move inland. So you get these little tornadoes that's popping up, and so you have that well away from the eye where you have the strongest winds at the current moment. So again, a very powerful hurricane that's continuing to make its way further off to the north, likely to make landfall later on this afternoon or toward the evening as a Category 4 hurricane, maybe even a Category 5. Now, I do suspect there will be some weakening as it gets a little bit closer to the shoreline, especially if it's going to continue that track where it's going to the northeast. It hasn't been straight east, but mainly northeast. So a gradual move in, not a straight line move in. So I think most likely on this current trajectory, it would make a landfall just to the north of the Fort Myers area and then continue to move further off to the north as well. Typically with the hurricanes, once they move over land, they start to lose their punch a little bit. There's no longer the warm waters feeding the storm. And so once it makes landfall, it will start to weaken. Yesterday, when we were looking at this, very interestingly enough, once it made landfall, and that was when we were seeing it over toward the Tampa area, a little bit further to the north, it made that hook right up the peninsula, and it was a nice little jog up the peninsula toward Jacksonville, where it would lose a lot of its punch. So even as it moved into South Georgia, for example, with a scenario like that, you talk about very, very weakened system by then. This one continuing across the peninsula. So if you look at its trajectory now, just north of Fort Myers, making its way up toward Daytona Beach. That's still a lot of real estate that the storm would have to travel. So we're expecting it to weaken by the time it gets up toward Daytona Beach to a tropical storm or tropical storm status, and then jumping off the coast, where again it could strengthen once again. Maybe a top end tropical storm or maybe even a Category 1 hurricane before it begins to make its way back inland once again. Notice all the hurricane warnings that's associated with the system that extend right up along the west coast of Florida. Adjacent to that, you do have the tropical storm warnings that includes the east coast of Florida, so Miami. We're talking about Daytona Beach and extending it further off to the north. In fact, extending up our coast as well, those tropical storm warnings. You also have the Bahama Islands under a tropical storm warning as well. Again, this is a massive storm. Even though this particular icon kind of shows it very small, this takes up a lot of real estate. And so even the outer bands affecting a lot of this particular area here. So really, once this storm moves past this area, we're going to be hearing about a lot of damage, not only to the coastline there, but also extending inland especially with the flooding that will be taking place. There's a lot of water. This is a big storm, and so it's going to dump a lot of rain in this particular area, talking maybe up to 20 inches in some spots, maybe even higher than that in some as well. Florida a little bit lower in elevation than we are, and so yeah, you're talking about a mess with this particular storm. Again, it shows it weakening. This is as of the 8 a.m. update. Shows the storm weakening somewhat as it moves almost adjacent to Tampa, starting to slide a little bit further off to the north, headed up toward the Daytona Beach area. That's where, again, it will jump out to sea once again, and then make that hook back toward, say, Tybee Island, our northern coast, northern Georgia coast, southern South Carolina coast, somewhere in there, making another landfall, but as a tropical storm, and then heading further off to the north. Now, yesterday we were watching also some models bringing that system a little bit back further to the west. Now, if you look at the cone of uncertainty, though, it keeps the cone of uncertainty just to the east of the metro area, and so you're talking places like maybe Athens on the edges of that white bar there that you see, as far west as they're predicting that it would go at this particular point. We keep it in the middle, though, because that would be where the bulk of the models tell us where it's going, so we kind of follow that consistency there. And so if that's the case, it would stay right into South Carolina and head further off to the north. We talk about the right side of the storm or the west side of the storm. The west side receiving the least amount as far as the impacts, as far as the rainfall goes. You really get that wraparound or offshore kind of flow. The onshore flow on the right side of it is where you get the brunt of it. You got the strongest winds in that part of the storm. You got the strongest or the highest storm surge in that part of the storm. You get very little storm surge, obviously, with winds coming off land. Okay, so back behind it. So back behind it, you're not going to see much in the way of rainfall. And I do think over the next couple of hours, our rain totals will even be adjusted to come down a bit if we stay with this current path of the storm as it continues to slide up to the north. So again, this bodes very well for us and areas off to the west, so places like Alabama, even into western portions of Tennessee as the storm continues to slide further off to the north. If you're on the west side of that center of circulation, it looks a little bit better. So you have lower amounts, lower impacts, if you will, as far as the winds and that rain. And I mentioned that would be our impacts, the rain, obviously, and that would start late on Friday as the storm continues to head further off to the north. You're talking about late Friday going into Saturday off and on through the day, and then finally wrapping up as we head into Sunday. But again, we're on the west side of that storm system, so it bodes well for us now, but our neighbors over toward the east, well, that may be a different story, maybe a big time different story there, so we'll continue to monitor it. But this is the latest track from the Hurricane Center. Again, winds right now up to 155 miles per hour, gusts as high as 190. 190, wow. Moving to the northeast at about 10 miles per hour. Suspect it will stay about that speed, may slow down just a little bit before it makes landfall later on this afternoon. It will interact a little bit with the coast as the eye gets a little bit closer there. So I'm suspecting that the closer it gets, it'll start to come down just a little bit there as it encounters some friction coming on shore there. So could it make it up to a Category 5 hurricane? Certainly it could. Very close now, about a good 3 miles per hour away from becoming a Category 5. That would be something amazing, folks, for a Category 5 to touch down in Florida. But even a Category 4 is nothing to just consider much weaker. Obviously, it's around the same as that continues to push further off to the north. But a Category 5, wow. Again, that will weaken as it pushes onshore and then make that jog. We'll continue to update you on the storm as we go along. The next major update will come out at 11 a.m. Meteorologist Melissa Nord will have your update for you on the storm if it changes paths or if it stays the same, and the